their preferences, in which people can express their preferences about what they want or wouldn't want in various scenarios or situations towards the end of life or towards what might be the end of life. And this is a trend that's all around, and you'll be offered these things, these documents, by sometimes by your state, by government, by hospitals, by healthcare providers, whoever it might be. And the question becomes is, well, what is appropriate within the Jewish community, what is culturally sensitive, and particularly by those who govern their lives by halakha, by Jewish law, and want to make sure that on the one hand, that their values and preferences are expressed to their healthcare providers and to their loved ones. Now, there have been a lot of changes in the world of healthcare directives over the years. And it's important to understand this, and you'll see why as we go along, which is at one point, many doctors and various hospitals and others were providing very detailed types of healthcare directives in which people could say, if I'm in scenario X, please do Y or do Z, or don't do Y or don't do Z. If I'm in situation A, do this or don't do that, and so on and so forth. And to a certain extent, that still exists. And many different states, for example, Maryland, Virginia, and others, will have those types of advanced healthcare directives available to people. Many times people will be offered such advanced healthcare directives by their state attorneys or lawyers or others. And in general, before we even get to the Jewish context of this, there are a lot of questions about how useful, the utility of these types of documents. Those documents have great utility when people have a very clear diagnosis and prognosis, meaning they have something which they are sick from, particularly when they're terminally ill or critically ill, and their healthcare trajectory is somewhat known or very well known, in which case there's a lot of logic to saying I want X or don't want Y. But in general, and you can see this in the most recent New England Journal of Medicine, one of the lead editorials was following, though, many years of research on this already. It's been shown that saying what you might want if you're in a critical car accident, or you have an advanced state of dementia or ALS, or whatever it might be, when you're 52 and running marathons, and you're making decisions about what it might be when you're 67 or 87 or whatever it might be, has not been too successful in actually predicting what people want, because people change their minds, people experience things differently. Family members don't always understand what these directives mean, and therefore, in general, there's been a trend to push away from some of these directives in the broader world. That said, that doesn't mean, however, that there isn't a great amount of value for people talking about their preferences. And the preferences can take two forms. Preference number one is to declare who you want to make decisions on your behalf if you're no longer able to make decisions on your own. This is very important. This is what's known as a power of attorney for healthcare matters, or a healthcare proxy. In different places around the world, it's called different things. But the idea is that this person will be your agent. They'll speak on your behalf if you're no longer able to speak for yourself. If you do not designate who this person will be, that can create all sorts of confusion, and we'll see how we try to deal with this, and create a lot of fights. And sometimes healthcare providers have to decide, and they have to get lawyers sometimes to get involved, and it can be very messy. And so it's very, very important, and this everyone agrees, in the healthcare community and beyond, that it's important to clarify who should make these decisions on your behalf. Okay? The second thing that people have tried to do now, if you're not going to say, well, if I'm in a situation X, Y, or Z, do this procedure or that procedure, because people don't fully understand those medical situations, what those procedures mean, is that we try to give people a general sense of our values and preferences. And what I mean by that is as follows. It's really nice and very good and essential, in fact, to appoint a healthcare proxy, a power of attorney on your behalf, right, to who will make these decisions. But let's say you are the power of attorney. I'm sure many of you right now who are on this Zoom, some of you are thinking about filling this out for yourself, and some of you are probably thinking about filling out for loved ones. It could be a sibling, it could be a parent. Some of you might think about for both, right? Many of you probably should be thinking about it for both, for yourselves and for your loved ones. And so if you want to put yourself in a position, say you are a power of attorney for someone, you're the healthcare proxy, and the first question that you're going to ask yourself is, well, what would mom want? What would dad want? What would my loved one want in this scenario? And so it's very important to be able to have conversations with family members about how you generally see these things. Okay. And there are various tools out there that have been created to help facilitate these conversations. Now, all of this is true, I've said until now, is with regard to the general society as a whole. When it comes to the Jewish community, there are clearly certain cultural sensitivities, as people like to call it today, in which people have to be aware of, healthcare providers have to be aware of, and we have to be aware of for ourselves. And certainly those of us who govern our lives by halacha, by Jewish law, think it's very, very important that our healthcare trajectory, that the decisions that need to be made in these very sensitive areas should be in consonance with halacha. And it's super important, particularly because many of the documents that you'll find out there in the world today, in the broader community that your lawyer or a healthcare provider might provide to you, include options which are halachically problematic. And so various rabbinic organizations, the Rabbinical Council of America, the Aguda Yisrael, and others have created different documents over the years to try to meet this need. And what Ematai is trying to do is to update these types of documents to be sensitive to the findings of social sciences of what has worked and what hasn't worked when it comes to advanced healthcare directives, and to create also a user-friendly document. Because you'll see in the general society and broader society, there are many websites out there. There's a conversation project, there's 5 wishes, there are all sorts of projects like this in which people have very user-friendly documents and websites. And in the Jewish community, it hasn't quite caught up in being user-friendly. And so what Ematai is trying to do is to create a document which is user-friendly and accomplishes 2 goals. Goal number 1 is to create a legal document which declares who you want to be your power of attorney or healthcare proxy, and declares to your healthcare provider that you want your healthcare decisions to be governed by Jewish law and custom. I'll explain more what this means later on, including clarifying who you'd want to be consulted on the rabbinic level. And then we've created a second document, which is less of a document than a guide, a primer, to help people to discuss their general values and preferences within the halachic context. And so there are definitely other documents out there. I encourage you, if you want to see other models, you can take a look at the Agudat Yisrael website or the Rabbinical Council of America website. The document which I'm going to show you now has been developed by Ematai in consultation with many, many, many doctors and healthcare providers and lawyers and rabbis, and has also been reviewed word for word by 2 leading poskim, Rabbi Mordechai Willig and Rabbi Hershel Schechter, Shita of Yeshiva University. But as we'll see, you'll see, I think, what many of the benefits are as we get straight into the document. So as I mentioned beforehand, the document is available online at Ematai's website. You can see it here, ematai.org/netivot. If you're following along on your computer right now, I would encourage you to go into up to this website as well. You can follow along with me. You should be choosing the U.S. directive, meaning if you're from Washington, you should be choosing the U.S. directive. We also have a version that is legally binding in Ontario and in Quebec, including a French version, by the way, for Quebec. But the model that you should be using here, as you'll see, you have a healthcare directive and a conversation guide. There's a little video here that'll explain exactly what we're going to do and how to do this. But of course, we'll walk you through this right now as well. And you can see other parts on the website also. You can fill this out by printing the document as a PDF. You can also complete it online as a fillable PDF, right? You can just type it right in there. And the same thing is true about the healthcare directive as well, and the guide, and so on. If you're in certain states, you have specific requirements, but I'm assuming from Greater Washington, you don't fall into these states. But if you do happen to live in these states, there are a couple of special directions for you. And you can see all sorts of information on our website, which we'll come back to. Okay, so I'm going to now walk us through this document. I will take us through each step. And we're going to start with the legal document. Okay, we're going to start with the healthcare proxy and directive, right? This is the part that has to be legally completed. It means that this has to be signed and witnessed appropriately, right? And you'll see the requirements actually are pretty simple. And And what I'm going to do is I'm going to encourage you to put questions in the chat, and I'm going to stop at different points. So I'll take a look at that. And of course, we'll have time for Q&A towards the end. But feel free to start sending in your questions now into the chat. And Ali or Rachel, if you see that there are a lot of questions coming up, feel free to pop in and say like, okay, we need to stop for a minute for already then, but I'll try to monitor this as well. So this document is user-friendly. It's a do-it-yourself document. I, of course, encourage people that if you'd like to, you can take this document and they can bring it to your lawyer or, Amitai is now offering a legal device here, of course, but we are very confident this is a legally legitimate document that can be used. And we have all the instructions here on our website and on this document as well. But I'm just going to go straight to the document itself to walk you through this because I think that's the simplest process. So here is the dark green. You see the healthcare proxy and directive. We're going to begin now in terms of going through. Again, if you're doing this online, you are welcome to start filling this out online right now, or you're also welcome to start jotting notes if you've printed it out on a piece of paper. And of course, this is a free service that's available to the community. Of course, we depend on support and donations from those that can, but this is a free document, and you can always come back to this site and download it as you wish. Okay, so the first thing you have to do is, this is important, legal document here. Fill out your name, address, and telephone, date of birth, and you're going to designate the following person to act on my behalf if at any time I'm not able to make or communicate healthcare decisions for myself. Who do you want that person to be? Okay, now you're going to have to list their name, their relationship to you, and you should try to list as many ways as possible to reach them. Their emails, other emails, different numbers. If they're a person that lives on Facebook or Instagram, you can put that down, jot that down as well, and the other, whatever it might be. And every person needs to think about who that is going to be for them. And it's not, for some people, this is a simple question to answer, but for others, it's not so simple. So let me explain some of the things. So, for example, if you and your spouse might be in your 70s or 80s and not sure who's going to be around, who's going to be available, who's going to be competent to make such decisions, you could choose, right, to put your spouse down. But you might say, okay, you know what, we're going to put down our children, our niece, whatever it might be. Okay, you might do that. And then the question becomes also is that within children, let's say, or family members, who would you want that to be? Okay, now, there are a number of different factors, right? The most important factor that you have to keep in mind, and we explain this as well on the instructions here, is you have to ask, right? And I'm going to show you here this as well. Who should it be? So first, they have to be over 18. Second of all, they need to be available or make themselves available anytime we don't need them. Healthcare proxies, power of attorneys have to be available. They have to be willing to assert themselves, right, to express your wishes and to advocate for your needs. And you have to trust them to honor your values and act in accordance with your preferences to the best of their ability. Okay, the idea behind proxies is substituted judgment. They are people you choose are supposed to make decisions that you would make if you could speak for yourself. Now, of course, this is not a scientific process, right? This is not perfect. People can't always guess what you'd want. You might yourself not know what you'd want in such situations, but you want someone to be trustworthy who's going to do their best to honor your values and act in accordance with your preferences. And different people have different, family members or loved ones in their lives who can fulfill this role. So it could be a spouse, of course. It could be a sibling. It could be kids. And a lot of times people ask me, well, which of my kids should I pick? And the answer here, it really depends. First of all, their availability, right? So if you live in Silver Spring and the other person lives in Australia, or the kid lives in Australia, so they may not be able to hop on a plane so quickly and get there. You never know, right? If that's going to be available or not, that's always a factor. Shared values, their responsibility is very important. Sometimes people ask me, I have the variety pack of kids. What's the variety pack of kids? One is yeshivish and lives in Baltimore, Neri Soil community, or Lakewood. One is Modernisha, Mount Orthodox, lives in Riverdale. The third is, sort of traditional, lives in San Francisco. And the fourth lives in Israel, or the fourth isn't religious, or the fourth I'm not so close with, or whatever it might be, right? That's what we call the variety pack, right? And people have to decide, right, who they think is going to be able to speak best on their behalf and fulfill this obligation. Now, in an ideal setting, you'll have multiple people, of course, you can count on, and multiple people who you can trust, and they can talk to each other. And of course, it is critically important to talk to different family members and to tell them who you've decided to be your healthcare proxy. And but also to say, if this is how you feel, you want them to talk to each other and work things out and talk as a family about these issues. So recently, for example, I had a case where Amatai, we have a helpline, a hotline. Someone called me up, and they're describing a situation where there are 5 children. 3 of the sons are Haredi, 2 of them living in Israel, 1 living in America. 1 is modern Orthodox, and 1 is not religious. And the mom, who's sort of modern Orthodox, decided that the 2 kids, one that's not religious and one that is modern Orthodox, would be the proxies, right? It would be the ones that make decisions. And she explained this to them and told the family members, and it was critical that they let them know this issue. I had a very unfortunate situation where there are 2 kids in the family. One was a family member who is a doctor or a healthcare provider, and so the dad decided to appoint her, but never told the son that. And so they get to the hospital when the moment of truth comes, and the daughter asserts and says, "All right, well, I'm the healthcare proxy," and the son's like, "I didn't know anything about this. Why were you chosen?" Right? It's always healthy and helpful to talk these things over ahead of time. Now, you might say, okay, well, I've got multiple people in my life who can be involved. Why don't they make these decisions together? There are forms out there in the world that allow this. It's called when you have to make joint decisions. And Matai has gone against that model for the simple reason. Our experience, and from the experience that we've had from the many healthcare providers and lawyers and rabbis who dealt with this in a real-time situation, is you got to have one person who's going to make the ultimate decision, and creating a situation where people are legally obligated to sign off together and make that decision together creates more complications than anything else. However, it is very important to have alternates. And the reason is you could designate your proxy, it could be a spouse, it could be a family member, whatever it is, and they're not available or they're not able to talk. In which case, you need to know who's next on the list, who's alternate 1, who's alternate 2, right? Who should be speaking on your behalf. So as much as possible, it is very important to have an alternate in this situation. People sometimes also ask me, well, should I appoint my rabbi as my proxy? So again, let's go back to what we said earlier. The proxy is someone who has to be available and will make themselves available anytime when you'll need them. Okay? Rabbis are busy. Rabbis have their own families. Rabbis have a lot going on. They're traveling to Israel. They have funerals, whatnot. We don't recommend, right, that situation. Sometimes people have told me, the various situations, they're nervous. They don't have someone in their life who can fill this role. If you feel you're in that situation, please email me, and I'll be more than happy to try to work it out, talk it through with you. The issue of unrepresented patients, of patients who don't have proxies, power of attorney, is a big one in modern Western societies. In the Jewish community, we need to address this, and we should make sure that that everyone in our community feels like they have someone who can speak on their behalf. Very, very important part. I don't want to spend too much time on that right now, but it is very, very important factor. Okay, so this is the basic declaration you're doing. You've created now the proxy. Now, in this document, which again, you can fill out online and you can fill out by printing out, whatever you prefer, we have a legal directive. The legal directive is a very simple, is not overly complicated directive, and it states as follows. My proxy has full authority to make decisions for me about my health care, including end-of-life care, if I'm not able to make or communicate healthcare decisions for myself. This includes my desire, which I hereby direct my proxy, that all decision making about my healthcare should be done in accordance with Jewish law and custom. Okay? You are now, this is what makes it uniquely Jewish document, is that you are declaring that things should be done in accordance with Jewish law and custom. In the lower parts of it, this includes, we strengthen as much as possible, and we think we've done this better than other options out there in the community, to strengthen the status of the proxy as much as possible. This doesn't mean, of course, that you shouldn't consult with your healthcare providers and talk, have open discussions. Of course, you should. That's very important. You try to establish those relationships. Of course, it's very, very important. However, when push comes to shove, someone has to make the decision. And what this document tries to do is to protect the status of the person you chose to be your healthcare agent under law. Okay, and so this gives them all sorts of privacy access. This allows them to make decisions with regard to hospital or hospice or nursing home. This relates to issues of nutrition, hydration, and the issue of surgical procedures and refusing, withdrawing, and so on and so forth. Right? And we specify here, you want this person to make these decisions. This is the person you think will do what's in your best interest and knows your decisions as best as possible. Now, again, I'm not by any means in this document, we are not trying to belittle or reduce the importance of open conversation with your healthcare providers, but there are certain trends in society in which sometimes people or institutions say, we know what's best for this person, or we know what's in their best interest, or they wouldn't know what they would have wanted in this situation. And what we're trying to do on a legal level is to say that when push comes to shove, you've decided that you want to choose who will make the ultimate decisions on this, and we're trying to protect the status of that person. Now, having said all that, there's also here, by the way, a line with regard to autopsies, because we want the handling of the body to be done pursuant to Jewish law and custom. And we say that if legally it has to be done some form of postmortem procedure, it should be done the least invasive procedure as possible. Okay, that's very important because sometimes it is legally required in a given state or situation, and we want to make sure, if they can, they should X-rays or certain minimal types of invasive procedures in order to maintain bodily integrity. And once again, we conclude, is my express wish for the decisions of my proxy to be honored. I trust my proxy's ability, and including my desire that all decision-making about my healthcare should be done in accordance with Jewish law and custom. Now, the obvious question you might be asking is, well, what exactly does Jewish law and custom mean? And the answer to that question, as we know, is that, well, there are different opinions in the community, right, about what exactly this means. And you now have to make that decision, what we call in Hebrew a selech harav, right, designate your rabbi, and say that if there are issues that come up in terms of what exactly is the requirements, I would advise my proxy to consult with the following rabbi or religious institution. You'll note that we use the formulation of advise and consult for very clear legal reasons. We do not want to have a legal ambiguity about who is supposed to sign off on decisions. Many lawyers have advised me, I've had this actually in 3 different countries, that some of the documents that exist out there in the Jewish world could be legally challenged because there's the ambiguity. Who exactly is supposed to make the decisions? Is it the power of attorney? Is it the rabbi? Is it something called Jewish law and custom, or Orthodox Jewish law and custom, whatever it might be? And therefore, we formulated this very carefully to say that is not the rabbi who's going to make the ultimate decision, but you want, right? You're telling your proxy to consult with the following rabbi or religious institution. Who is that for you? Now, this is a very, very important decision for people to make. And it's an important decision for a number of reasons. First of all, just in general, many things in life, right? Deciding who you want your rabbinic wisdom and your Jewish wisdom to be taught from, to be learned from, is a very important decision. But also, when it comes down to practically speaking, it's not always clear to people. It could be a longtime shul rabbi, but it could be, he's retired, or it could be he's passed away, or he's moved to Israel, whatever it might be. And then you ask, okay, well, maybe the new rabbi, but maybe you don't know the new rabbi so well. Maybe it's one of your kids' rabbis. Well, that depends on, do you want your kids' rabbis to make those decisions? Do you agree with that rabbi? Do you see eye to eye in those decisions? Let's go back to our variety pack model, right? You've got the yeshivish kid in Baltimore, and the modern Orthodox one in Riverdale, right? You got the message, and one in Israel. And which rabbi they're going to consult with? The answer frequently is they're all going to consult with each of their own rabbis, which then is going to have 3 Jews and 4 opinions, and that is not going to help anyone. And so it is very, very important for you to be able to go and say, right, listen, when push comes to shove, I want you to consult with this rabbi. Selech harav, you should make that decision. Okay. For some people, this is very obvious who this should be. Other people, it's not so obvious. But you should also tell the rabbi that you've decided, right? I want you to serve this role. I know of rabbis who told me that they frequently have situations where they're called up and said, you were named this person's posek, as consultant, whatever it is, and they didn't even know who the person was, right? As someone who once was a member of their shul, whatever it might be. And so it's important to make sure this person knows, and I encourage people to talk to their rabbis about their views about these types of issues, because it could be you love this rabbi, think he's the greatest darshan, want them to give you your hesped, but you see very differently on these types of issues, right? And so you might say, listen, I want to give the hesped, but when the call has to be made, I want someone to go to the rabbi I trust in these matters. Okay, so this is a very important element. And one of the things that we encourage people to do also, once again, is here to have an alternate. Why? Because many, many times rabbis aren't available. They're giving shiurim. They're in a funeral. They're flying somewhere. Whatever it is. There are many times it's the way the rabbis are, right? Rabbis can't be available 24/7 for everyone. 1/7, Rabbi Mordechai Willig once mentioned to me that 1/7 of all halachic shilas on these issues happen on Shabbat. So I said to him, Rav Willig, how do you know that? He goes to me, because the angel of death works 24/7, and therefore 1/7 of all shilas comes up on Shabbat. Right? And he was making a point, which is to say, right, that you just need to make sure you have people who are available. Now, in that respect, we tell people, go pick your pecking order. Put your altar number 1, altar number 2. Someone already asked in the questions, which is a very important one, is are there rabbinic organizations or Jewish organizations who are available to make a decision, who know both the medical and halachic factors? So Ematai, for this reason, because you mentioned this, has created a helpline which operates 24/7, including, by the way, on Shabbat, where we take shilas on Shabbat, because when people are calling us on Shabbat, they're calling us on very serious issues. And you see that we give here our phone number, which also, by the way, is a WhatsApp, 646-599-3895, which can be an alternate backup or as your primary consultant if you do not have a rabbi. And you can look on our website, and you can see we have a full section that explains very clearly. We're very transparent about how we look at these issues and how we view these issues, and you can see that on our website. But I think there are other organizations as well, certainly, that provide that service. I'm not sure which organizations in the greater Washington area do that, but again, once again, it's one of those things that you can certainly discuss with your rabbi or your shul or local federation or rabbinic organization, wherever it might be. Now, friends, we are almost done with the legal part of this document, because this is like I said to you, it is a user-friendly document. And here we get to one issue, which is a very important and sensitive one, but is the one issue which is a matter of dispute in Jewish law, and that has to do with organ donation. As many of you know, and if you're interested in more in this, you can see on our website, we have a lot of descriptions of this. We have a lot of educational materials on our website in general. But if you go to our website and you go to, or you can just even type in option18.org. I'm putting it in the chat right now. It will take you to the part of our website which discusses the issue of organ donation within posthumous organ donation within Jewish law. There's a bit of a dispute about this issue, where some rabbis only accept the idea of cardiac death, means the heart has to stop beating and for a person to be declared dead, which largely precludes organ donation, although technology is certainly developing in ways in which, as things develop, I fully anticipate in the coming years, it will be possible to do greater amounts of organ donation after cardiac death. In fact, Ematai is working with the transplant team at NYU about lung retrieval after cardiac death right now. But then there is what's known as respiratory brain death or brainstem death, which is then the irreversible cessation of respiration, and a person is totally unresponsive to their environment. This is the halachic criteria for death. This is the criteria for death which was accepted by Israel and the Israeli chief rabbinate and many rabbis and poskim around the world as well. And so we know this is a great debate, but we don't want people to not sign these documents and not make a selection when it comes to organ donation because of this barrier. And so we formulated this very clearly. This section is relevant only if death, as defined by Jewish law and custom, has been determined by my proxy in consultation with my named rabbinic consultant. Please select from the options below. And a person can select: I authorize my proxy to approve transplantation, I do not wish to donate, or authorize my proxy to approve transplantation for only the following organs or tissues. Okay, person can sign this out. And this, by the way, is also helpful for those who would like to register as an organ donor because they accept respiratory brain death, but do not want to write that for the at the DMV or to the healthcare on Donate Life America, or wherever it might be. And therefore, they want to keep that power in the hands of their proxies. And so we tell people, mark it here and let your proxy know what criteria for death you want to have. Okay, this is the end of the selections you have to make for the legal part of the document. You have to sign this, make sure your name, signature, asterisk, make sure to date it. This is a legal document. You got to date this document. You should be witnessed by someone, and the two people, excuse me. And the way that we made this a multi-state document is we didn't go through and say, okay, we'll make a document for Maryland, and make a document for Virginia, we'll make a document for Washington, D.C. That causes, we think, a lot of confusion. We follow the model of the American Bar Association, the ABA, to create a document where the most machmir standards, if you will, of who can be a legal witness were utilized, and we said, okay, everyone should use this. So the person you should witness is not the proxy or the alternate proxy or the rabbi. It's not someone who's financially responsible for your health care. It's not someone benefit from you, and so forth. Not your healthcare provider, not related by blood, marriage, domestic partnership, or adoption, nor a spouse of any such person. And basically, they're uninterested parties. Okay? You want to have uninterested parties who are above the age of 18, competent, who can sign this document. And if they sign this document and witness you signing this document, this is a legally binding healthcare proxy. Okay? Legally binding. This is very important. This is a real document. Some people like to do this in front of a notary. You're welcome to do that. In the vast majority of states, this doesn't have to be done before a notary, but residents of Missouri, North Carolina, South Carolina, and West Virginia must have this signed before a notary, and therefore we give that option as well. This is the end of the legal document. It is meant to be clear and crisp and allow you to make some very, very important statements, to say who you want to make those decisions on your behalf, to let your healthcare providers know that you care about Jewish law and custom, that healthcare should be done in accordance with Jewish law and custom, to clarify who the rabbi is, who should be consulted when necessary, and to give your preference with regard to organ donation for transplantation. Okay, that is the legal document. Now, if you put this document in your safety deposit box or with your financial will, it ain't going to help anyone. And the reason why it's not going to help anyone is that when those issues come up, that's not going to be available. So it's important to store the original copy in a safe but accessible place. You should give a copy to the proxy. You should file this with your healthcare provider or at the hospital, the lawyer, whatever it might be. We recommend people to review this once every 5 years. The reason is simple. It could be that who you decide should be your rabbinic consultant has changed. Your rabbi's retired. Your rabbi's passed away. A lot of things can happen. It could be you've decided, given spouses, got divorced, God forbid, people die, relationships change, people move, whatever it is, you want to have a document which is up to date for your preferences and wishes. And therefore, we recommend for people to review this every 5 years in order to make sure that this document is accessible 24/7. We also have partnered, you can see this on our website, we've partnered with something called USA CPR. USA CPR is a business, it's an organization. They handle all sorts of companies, the state of Vermont and unions and all sorts of others. And you can see on our website, you can click onto the USA CPR. I think it's like $40 for lifetime access, 24/7, 365. And they also provide a card. So if, God forbid, they don't know how to reach you and the hospital needs to know, they have who to call, and they can also call USA CPR, who will send them immediately your healthcare proxy, right, which is a very valuable thing to have. And therefore, it's not obligated, but we certainly recommend for people to sign up with USA CPR. It's a discounted rate, and they're very relatively cheap and a great service. Okay, and that is your advanced healthcare directive, proxy, and directive. Okay, I'm going to stop here for a second. If there are any questions, people should write in the chat. But as you can see, we've tried to make this a simple, relatively simple, right, document that is easy and user-friendly, that people can fill out in a clear manner and utilize, right? This is not hard to get it signed. You can go to your neighbor's house and so on. Okay, now, I see a question right here which comes up, which is, does halacha require the use of extraordinary life-saving efforts? Okay, so first of all, we have to define what extraordinary means, right? And there's a lot of different opinions on this issue. If you look on our website, once again, you'll see we offer a lot of different types of I'll put it out here, right? If you go to the learn section, you see end of life care. You can see all sorts of descriptions and discussions of principles of end of life care, DNR, artificial feeding, treatments, intubation, hospice, organ donation, and a whole bunch of issues. We also have a lot of videos and whatnot. Menachem, maybe we'll do this as a separate share about these issues. But the important point to keep in mind is that these are questions which is good to know what your rabbi feels on this topic or what you feel about this topic to clarify beforehand. Because if you don't take the time to learn about these issues, discuss it, clarify a little bit beforehand, it's going to be a speculative job for your family members to make those types of decisions. What if I want to donate an organ that may not be allowed by Jewish law, like a kidney? I'm not sure what that means. In fact, kidneys are most likely to be allowed. So in general, so we were asking a little about organ donation. So yes, so organ donation is a sensitive topic, but there are many poskim and rabbis who do allow posthumous organ donation. And that really depends on what you think the criteria of death is. So if you're interested in learning more about this, once again, I'm going to refer you to the issue of time of death and posthumous organ donation on our site. And you can see the different opinions about this and different views about what is allowed and what is not allowed on these issues. Okay, and that's one of the things I encourage people to clarify with their family, with their rabbis, and whatnot. Next question was, what is USACPR? USACPR is just an organization. It's a business, a very good business, which tries to help people deal with keep their sensitive documents in an easy way. And so it's someone we partnered with that you can go to their site, sites keep popping up, and you can go to their site and you can register, right, for an account here, and you go through our thing, and you can see here, right, it's $45, and you then have the option to upload this document and other documents as well. Well, the questions we have in the chat. If someone already has an advanced healthcare directive they have completed through a non-Jewish company, should they replace it with this one? No, that's a great, great question. I'd say I would look carefully at that document and see, is it halachically sensitive or not? Many, many times, the boilerplate documents that are provided by a lawyer or non-Jewish company are not halachically sensitive. And so they will include legal directives, which, in fairness, will be interpreted by healthcare providers to mean you want certain things which you might not want, right, under Jewish law, or might not want in general. And so I would certainly take a hard look at what you people have signed beforehand. The general rule, by the way, is that the document that is dated most recently, meaning the one that was signed most recently, is the document which is legally binding. And so if you end up replacing your document, it's important to give the new one directive to your proxy and your healthcare provider and others, and bring back old copies of the ones that you don't want anymore, because it's important that they shouldn't have that old document still circulating around. Someone asked about, are there variations of the form that are applicable to Israel? Yeah, so this is a big issue that comes up. There are people that spend time in different countries. You could be spending time in Canada, you can spend time in Israel. Legally speaking, these documents, in general, right, are only applicable in the country of law in which, right, legally binding in the country in which it was signed. So Israel has its own form of document, Canada has its own form of document. And if you regularly spend time in those countries, I would definitely encourage you to create a advanced directive in those countries. As you saw, we already created such a document for Ontario and Quebec, and we're in the process of creating different variations of it for Israel, Australia, and the UK. I hope by the end of the summer, those will be available. There's a lot going on in the world right now, but I hope that, please God, by the end of the summer, those will all be available. Rosalind asked about the halachic organization that can help with medical decisions. So, I'd say the following. One of the things that there are different organizations out there, it could be Biko Home of Greater Washington provides the service as well. There are referral organizations, sometimes helps people talk these things through, and the Amatai consultation helpline. So I'll just show you where you can see this on our website. Just pull this up. But if you go to the real-time consult, you can see that we have here availability, and it's for urgent questions, but also you can set up conversations, right? We have like a consult, and we will pull on a doctor relevant for the field who can help us talk these things through as well. It is very, very important. I want to stress this. It's very, very important for people to try to upstream those conversations. We call this organization Ematai in the spirit of Im lo achshav Ematai, if not now, when. And so we'll have situations where people say, someone, I had a case, it was really very, very sad. Someone calls up and says, I need help making a decision about a feeding tube with someone, mom, I think it was, and they have both advanced dementia and advanced Parkinson's. Okay, that's not a great combination. But obviously those are both degenerative diseases that you can sort of know where things are headed. And the first question that I asked, because that's the question that Professor Schechter of Asher Weiss and others taught me to ask is, well, what do you think mom would have wanted? And frequently the answer is we never talked about it. And that's because they didn't have the proper type of medical advice or didn't have rabbinic advice. And so, yes, it's very important, Rosalind, to take advantage of those opportunities to talk about these issues. Okay, so having now discussed some of the legal elements, we now get to the obvious issues. One second, I just want to answer this question. One of the participants on the program sent me the following message. People should be aware that in MD, Maryland, the doctor, not the family, makes the decision to end life support, which cannot be appealed or reversed. That's actually, I don't think that's actually correct. The end decision of life support, and the difference in New Jersey and somewhat in New York only has to do with the declaration of death, the criteria for death. New Jersey and to a certain extent New York have religious exemptions where people can say, I do not accept the brainstem death criteria. That's accepted in many countries around the world and all of the United States, including Israel, by the way, right? And they say that I don't want to accept this. I don't want death to be declared until the heart stops beating. Whereas in Maryland and other 48 states and Washington, D.C., there is no such legal right. The hospital has the right to determine death. When it comes to other types of issues of intervention, so life-sustaining therapies, however, then families certainly do have the right to decide if they want something withdrawn or withheld or to be maintained. It can come up for sure. There can be disagreements with the healthcare providers, and there can be discussions about these issues, no doubt about that. But on a fundamental level, patient autonomy still is respected, religious conscience is still respected, and that's included in Maryland, Virginia, and other places as well. So I think that the question was coming up with regard to the time of death, but the vast majority of people don't die in a manner in which brain death is really the issue involved, right? It's less than 2% of cases. And organ donation is usually not even available in those cases. But so that's why it doesn't come up every day. Okay, I don't want to get caught up with those specific issues. I'm happy to have another class on that topic, but I want to stick with regard to the issue that we're focused on here, which is the healthcare directive. You've now appointed your proxy. You've even now appointed your rabbi. And the obvious question that the healthcare provider, the proxy, power of attorney, or the road for that matter, might ask is, well, what would you prefer? Now, there's no doubt that there is a certain strand within halachic thought which doesn't really care about personal preferences, and their approach is more or less to say that there's no point for a living will, even because the will of a Jew is to live and to keep the heart beating. There's no doubt that that approach is out there. But I think many poskim, starting with Moshe Feinstein and Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and continuing today with Rosh Weiss and Professor Schechter and Mordechai Willig and Professor Avram Steinberg and Viat Rimon and many others, believe that personal preference is important. And that being the case within, of course, the confines of halakha, which is a very important caveat, but personal choice does play a role. And therefore, the question that you want to ask is, well, what would you prefer? And so, like I said earlier, we found that it is not helpful for people to give, if in this situation, I want this specific intervention or not this intervention. But it is important for people to have general conversations, to give us general sense of your wishes, your beliefs, your values, your preferences. And therefore, we've created a guide, which is like a primer of having a conversation. This isn't a formal legal directive. It does not need to be signed or witnessed. The goal here is to create healthy communication and ongoing conversations about these sensitive topics in an open and loving manner. And so what we try to do in this document, which now you can see we've switched to the light green header, right? It's a different type of document, is to get people to talk about these issues and give them some prompts. Give them a general sense. Now, this is just a general sense. As you're going to see here, you're not making specific declarations. But for example, on pain and risk tolerance, how do you look about these things, right? So you might say, I value undergoing potentially painful treatments if they have the potential of prolonging my life, even if they will not cure my underlying illness and may lead to significant discomfort, right? What's your general view about pain management when it comes to issues of prolonging life? But it's not going to cure you, but it may lead to significant discomfort, but it might also, right, continue your life. Are you the type of person who strongly disagrees that you value this, or you strongly agree? And the next question, which is somewhat of a Jewish question, though certainly we're not the only ones, is would your answer be different if you were going to try to do a potentially painful treatment to prolong life if the goal was to make it to a specific occasion, like a family wedding, a bar mitzvah, or a birth? That might change your answer, and it might not. So different people have different views on this, and sometimes you can speak for yourself and tell people, many times you won't be able to. And so if decisions have to be made post-operation, for example, right, you might want to indicate to your family here a general sense of how you look about these things. It is your medical team's responsibility to try to balance pain relief with maintaining your alertness. When it's difficult to maintain both, I prefer for them to prioritize pain relief, even if it means I'm not as alert or awake, or alertness, even means I may suffer pain and or other symptoms, right? Different people have a different orientation here. Now, again, if you can make these decisions for yourself, you'll be able to say, right, at that point, no, listen, you got to give me pain relief. No, I don't want pain relief here. I want to maintain alertness. It's very important for me to be responsive to my environment. But if you can't make those decisions, can't speak or clearly speak on your behalf, it's important for your family members to know. Same thing with regard to not just pain, but risk tolerance. I value undergoing high-risk procedure that might shorten or jeopardize my life if it could possibly cure my underlying illness. You might say, okay, I'm willing to take those risks. It might kill me, that procedure, but it might also cure the underlying illness. You might say, I'm even willing to undergo a high-risk procedure if it will stabilize my condition, but not cure my underlying illness. Or you might say it's even true or not true if it will extend my life by any amount of time, but not cure my underlying illness. You see what we're trying to get at here. We're not trying to get definitive scenarios. We're trying to give a general feel of how you think, and of course, you can write some additional comments as well. We then ask about decision-making preferences. As a patient, I generally prefer knowing as little as possible, only general summary information, all the details. If I have a terminal illness, right, this is a very specific case, you have a terminal illness, you are the type that prefers not knowing, only having general sense, or knowing the best detailed estimation. Why is this important to discuss? Because so many times family members think, we should tell mom, we should tell dad, not tell dad, whatever it is, because they think that's what they like. And the family member is like, I totally don't feel this way at all. So in fact, one of the members of our rabbinic advisory board, Rabbi Dr. Aaron Glatt, told me a great story. He's the chief medical officer of a hospital in New York. And he once had his patient where the person had cancer and the three sons, like strong, bully, strong guys come up to pull him to the side and say, Doc, we know dad's got cancer. Don't tell him. I say in a very gruff voice. And he has to go into the room while the patient set back up in his room. And the father pulls Dr. Glatt to him and says, Doc, I know I've got cancer. Don't tell my sons. Right? So there are different types of scenarios where this can come up. And it's important as much as possible to try to clarify a little bit how you think about this. Here are the two questions that are probably halachically most sensitive. And again, this is within the halachic framework, which is if I am deemed terminally ill, I would prefer treatments focused only on comfort and managing my symptoms, treatments focused on comfort and managing my symptoms, while also being open to potentially painful treatments or procedures that might extend my life, or treatments focused on extending my life without prioritizing my comfort. If I have an irreversible lack of cognition, as in cases of advanced dementia or severe brain injury, I would prefer, and again, the same three options. Now, again, within the context of halacha, this might mean treatments focused only on comfort and managing my symptoms might also include, depending on which posek or rabbi you work with, might also include, PEG or feeding tubes or other types of interventions. But it's important, and I see this so many times with various different poskim, who say, I really would like to know, what do people feel about this issue? And when people are at the early stages of dementia, by the way, it's so important to talk about this, right? Because it's not comfortable to talk about this, of course. But if you've talked about it, and then as dementia advances, it's super important for your family members to know, right? Well, what was your general preference, how you saw these things? Some people really believe, I want to be alive. I believe in life and living as long as possible. As long as my heart can still be breathing, I want to be alive. Other people are like, no, right? The Mishnah Avos tells us that it's every moment of life in this world is a valuable Mekayim mitzvah achat, right? But when I can't be Mekayim mitzvah and I can't have communication with my loved ones, I'm not really interested in continuing or starting new healthcare life-sustaining treatments or interventions. Okay, this is a matter of discussion, debate in rabbinic circles as well, of course, about what's allowed to withhold, what's not allowed to be withheld. And what we're trying to do, though, is to give a little general sense of what you feel on this issue within the halachic context. And finally, we ask people, and here's a section which I'd say is probably the least rabbinic of the sections. I mean, rabbis say to me, why do we have to fill this out? But all the social workers are like, no, this is the most important section. Okay? And this gets into talking a little bit about what people are afraid of or not afraid of when it comes to the physical and social independence. When thinking about aging, it is normal to feel angst about losing physical and social independence. It is important to share your concerns about losing your independence, its impact on your self-dignity, and your preferences on maintaining continuity with your living environment. And these are types of things you should address your fears. So that way family members can say to you, let's figure out how to address these fears. Right? We don't want to have a situation where people say, oh, I'm fearful that I'm excessive burden to others, and others say, oh, you're fearful of that. Okay, well, we should not do any life-sustaining interventions. No, of course not. We want people to be able to talk about what they're afraid of, so that way family members, loved ones can discuss, well, what is it that we can do to help alleviate your fears? It could be about needing someone to help me with my basic activities, feeling I'm an excessive burden to others, being alone and feeling lonely. And different people are going to have different fears depending on their situation, depending on their own experiences. And this is a prompt to be able to have people discuss some of these issues, which sometimes comes into a very lamaseh, practical application when it comes to where, if it became difficult for me to live in my home, I would value being cared for in the home of a family member, being cared for in a nursing home or long-term care facility, or remaining in my home, even if it meant limitations in the amount of skilled medical care I could receive. Now, of course, for different people, there are going to be different limitations based on their environment, based on the family dynamic, based on socioeconomic factors, but it's so important to address and talk about some of these issues. Okay? And the final part of the document, and again, until here, we give you opportunity to write some comments, but in the final part of the document, we allow people to share further thoughts. This could be elaborate in your healthcare preferences, right? Particular guidelines could be about invasive procedures or pain management, or organ donation, or decision-making, whatever it is. You might write here, I want you kids to make decisions together. Please try to do this as best as possible, right? You might write here, I really care about, if possible, I accept brainstem death. I want organ donation to be done. You could write here, I don't want, right, what happened to Uncle Dave. Okay, and here we give that opportunity to express. You describe in your own words what would be a good death or a bad death for you. You may find it helpful to invoke memories of the dying process or death of loved ones and discuss what you found meaningful or disturbing about the experiences. You may want to try finishing this sentence. What matters to me at the end of life is. Okay? And as you can see here, this again is not a document. There's no way here to sign it. And this is not something that has to be signed or witnessed or filed with your healthcare provider, because it's really for you and your family, your proxy, rabbi, to discuss these issues and get a general feel for your values and preferences. And of course, you might change over time how you feel about this issue, in which case you'll go to the website and just do the process and conversation again. But I cannot tell you how many people have told me they've gone through this guide, this, right? They had this conversation and it made them feel so relieved. And when I say to people, why is it you felt relieved? They tell me the following. I knew I had to have this conversation with mom or dad. I knew I had a conversation with my sibling, either because they have something going on already in their healthcare journey, or they're just getting up there in age. And I know I had to have this conversation, but I didn't know how to start it. And so I needed this document to help just propel it. And sometimes, by the way, people will say, I'm not sure I have an answer for this. And that's fine. I had one woman who called me up and said, my parents are 85 and 90, Baruch Hashem, doing okay. But, they've got their various healthcare issues. I just sat them down and said, we need to talk about this. And there are 13 different prompts here of conversations. They were able to give me a clear indication with 9 of them. And I looked at the end of this document and I said, okay, I got a feel for how you think about these issues, what your general orientation is. And that is going to be super valuable for me on Mav 3, right? We hope that takes, many, many years till this comes up. But death is one of those things that are inevitable. We have to confront it, right? And I think Judaism believes and affirms confronting our mortality in this manner, with our eyes wide open, with our emunah, with our belief, with our value system in place. And so it's so important to be able to talk about these issues in a clear manner. And like I said, this is a model which is really being promoted by a lot of different agencies now. And we've created a document which is halachically sensitive to the Jewish community on these types of issues. Okay, so I'll continue talking about this document in a minute, right? And then once you've had this document, what do you do with it? So once again, right, you can take it, you give it to your family member, you share it with your rabbi, whatever it is. But like I said, these are 2 different documents. One, dark green, right, header is a healthcare proxy and directive. You can see it right here. The second one is the conversation guide. One's a legal document, one's a not legal document, right? And those are very big differences. As with both these issues, I recommend every few years for people to review their answers. We say as a default 5 years, but of course, right, if people's healthcare journeys are taking different ups and downs, it pays to review these documents more often than not. But again, it depends on the situation. Okay, I'm going to open up now for questions in the chat with regard to now the conversation guide, right? The conversation prompts. Of course, I'm also happy to take questions as well with regard to the legal document also. Feel free, if you want to speak, and it's easier if you articulate yourself that way, we can unmute people as well to allow for direct decisions as well. You can click the hand button I think we allow this here. Yes, we have this here, where people can also raise their hand as well. Also submit a question to Audrey or directly to Ali, right? Directly in the chat or to me as we go along. Okay, while people, if you're thinking about questions, I want to just refer people again back because some of the questions came up here about, well, what does Judaism have to say about these issues? So if you go to our website, you'll see that we created a lot of different resources for people to learn about these issues, right? So if you go to educational resources, for example, you can see all sorts of discussion, elder abuse, caregiver stress, wills and documents, truth-telling, dementia, living facilities, prayers, prayers at the time of death, mourning rituals, right? So if you see here, for example, we have a practical summary of the laws of Avelut. You click here, and you'll see that we actually took this from a very practical book from the RCA, written by Rabbi Lenny Matenki and Rabbi David Brofsky. Just a very simple, like people sometimes in the moment, I need to know, right, what to do in these types of issues. And so we created a document like that. But there are many other types of features on the website as well. So Rick asks, what's a good way to coordinate with existing estate counsel these discussions and documents? So I'd say that's a great question. the first thing you got to do is see what you've signed previously. If your previous document has just more or less appointed a proxy, right, or power of attorney for healthcare matters, then and you're happy with that decision, right, and you feel like that covers you and it covers the alternates and whatever it might be. So then I would just go straight to the conversation guide, because the conversation guide is still very valuable, right, in terms of talking over your values and preferences. If you see that the document that you've created with your estate counsel has certain types that hasn't covered some of the scenarios or situations that we've talked about, hasn't created an alternate, hasn't clarified where the rabbi might be, hasn't told your healthcare providers they care about Jewish law and custom, or it could be that it was a boilerplate document which makes statements which could be or are in fact statements which might go against halacha. So I would then either bring this document, the Tivot document, amortized document, bring it to your healthcare provider, bring it to your counsel, to your state attorney, and say, listen, I have specific needs because of my Jewish religious beliefs, and therefore I want my document to reflect, right, those types of needs and preferences. And this could come up and they might say, okay, well, I don't do those documents. And you say, okay, well, let's get rid of that document. I'll just sign it in Tivot document and I'll file it with you. And that's fine. Or they could say, okay, let me take a look at this in Tivot document and I'm going to cater my document in a way, craft my document in a way which is sensitive to your religious needs. So everyone's got sort of a different situation, but it is very, very important to make sure that your existing documents are in consonance with Jewish law and custom. I was just meeting with a family who had a document that was signed by a lawyer for their father, and it was a huge, huge legal issue, which was extended in courts even. The vast majority of time, things don't go to courts. But the document that the father had signed had on it a situation that if I'm in a situation of, I forget what it was, like irreversible damage to my brain function or something like that, I want all healthcare, life-sustaining interventions to be withdrawn. In their case, they're on a ventilator, and this is going to lead to their immediate passing. And the family had to go to court, and it was a whole prolonged case. And they said, there's no way Dad, who cared about Jewish law so much, would have signed this document had he known that he was signing it. And it was a balagan. It was a total balagan, totally unnecessary. So it's important to clarify that. A question was, are copies of documents legally valid? So you should try to keep the document that's brought to, when it has to be brought somewhere, it should be the original. It should be kept with you in a certain case. But, when you send in, if you scan and send in to your healthcare provider that document, which is obviously a copy, right? That will be deemed legally valid. The vast majority of times, let's make sure I understand something. The vast majority of times, the hospitals are just looking for some form of clarity. Who is supposed to make these decisions? Right? So there isn't a challenge that's going to exist. When challenges emerge is when family members are fighting about it or there's some form of decisions, and that's why it's important to make sure that these documents are done right, right? Then they're done right. Which is why people tell me all the time, I know you guys in Matai, you checked this out, but I want to make sure my lawyer likes this. I said, Vakasha, go ahead, take it to your lawyer, utilize it, say, make sure they think it's okay. We haven't had any lawyers come back to us that say there's any problem with this whatsoever. If yours does, let me know. No, figure out why that might be. But we're very confident this is going to be accepted in hospitals and is a very useful document in this respect. Some writes in, thank you for taking the time to share this important information. Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yes, that is what we do. We try to help people on these types of issues. And Baruch Hashem, we're doing it all over the country now, all over the world actually now, in the United States and in Israel, helping people. By the way, as I mentioned before, the document is legally, you have to make it legally appropriate for the place you're living in. But the conversation guide, right, the second document which we reviewed is not a legal document, and therefore it can be done with anyone in the world. They don't even have to be Jewish for that matter, right? I mean, they could use it. I've had, we had a case when I was working on making sure that this document works for the Ohio state. Ohio has some certain special requirements. And so we're making sure that this worked for Ohio. And I showed it to a law firm, had 3 lawyers. One was from Jewish, one was not Jewish, but not from, and the third was non-Jewish. And the non-Jewish lawyer says to me, she goes through and says, your conversation guide, I'm going to use in my hospital, my law school, whatever it might be. This is very good, right? It's very helpful. And yeah, great. That's good. Okay, another question that came up here. If one does not have a rabbi and they want to be an organ donor following respiratory brain death, how does one go about finding a rabbi that supports this? Okay, so in general, I would encourage you not to only think about the brain death issue, but to find a rabbi that can be consulted as needed. If you don't have a rabbi and want to make sure you have someone down, then you can designate MTI. Right? We have our healthcare hotline, right? Consultation hotline. And what you should do is to make sure that whoever is going to make the decision on your behalf knows how you feel about this. This is so important, right? And I want to stress something, because there are times when people will go and they will sign up as an organ donor, for example, or whatever it might be, and don't tell their family members. And we just had a case like this in the Midwest. It was someone who had signed up as an organ donor with their state, hadn't told the family members, unfortunately died in very tragic circumstances. And the family was like utterly shocked that their loved one had signed up as an organ donor. That's a legally binding directive. So it's very, very important to talk about these issues. But if you're looking to find a rabbi that can support in these issues, feel free to sign a matai. But send us an email, office@amatai.org, or you can do it through our website consultation outline, so we can get to know each other and speak for a few minutes about this issue. Question was, if there's a problem if you live in 2 states like snowbirds. It was originally snow nerds, and not snow nerds, snowbirds, yes. So snowbirds this document will work anywhere in the United States. So if you are a snowbird, meaning you live in Baltimore, Silver Spring, or I don't know, Greater Washington area, and spend half the year in Florida, this will work. And this document will be respected in Florida as well. We've created, in general, federalism demands respect for this, but we've created a document that's a multi-state document and will be respected in different states. The issue that comes up is if you go for different countries don't have to respect legal documents that are made in other countries. And that's why we recommend you should definitely consult with a lawyer on this issue, but our general recommendation is you should complete a different one for the countries where you're spending multiple amounts of times. But again, I encourage people to consult with their own specific situations. Should a conversation guide be provided to the healthcare provider, the lawyer, or only the proxy? The conversation guide is really, really meant more than anything to be a conversation, less than a document. It is critical that it should be provided to the proxy, the family members, the people who are making decisions. It is not something that has to be given to your lawyer or your healthcare provider per se. You're welcome to, but it should be clarified to them that this is not meant to be a legal document, right? It's not meant to be giving any form of instruction here. It doesn't have to be held together, which is why, more than anything, it should be a conversation about it. A lot of this depends also on the dynamics that you have with your healthcare provider, and therefore, I encourage people to try to create open types of conversations with healthcare providers, but the conversation guide is primarily for the person who will be making decisions on your behalf, right? Whether it's the proxy, family members, or rabbi. Other questions? Option 18. So option 18 is the name of AMATIVE's initiative that educates when it goes to issues of organ donation. Okay, option 18 is continuation, a bit of a change from the work of what used to be known as the Halachic Organ Donor Society. When I became the executive director of Halachic Organ Donor Society, we did this on the condition, right, that we were going to expand and broaden our work to deal with all sorts of end-of-life decisions. Organ donation doesn't come up every day, but when it comes up, of course, it's a matter of life and death, and you save lives. And so option 18 is the education initiative of AMATI with regard to organ donation, including on the next issue with regard to the difference between respiratory brain death and other kinds of death. So it's hard to say this in a nutshell. It could be, Ali, we need to have a separate sort of session on this so we can explain to people a little bit about these issues. But in a nutshell, the issue is as follows. Do you accept the irreversible cessation of respiration? A situation where a person is not only non-responsive to their environment, but will never, ever, ever, ever again be able to breathe on their own. It's not like a coma. It's not like a vegetative state. Is that considered to be the halachic criteria of death? That is what allows organ donation, even though the heart is still beating because the body is being maintained through artificial ventilator. Some rabbis, led by the Israeli chief rabbinate, accept that halachic criteria for death, and that allows for organ donation. Others think that since the heart is still beating, we cannot declare a person to dead, and even though inevitably the heart will stop and a person cannot recover from such a situation, they're not technically dead at that point, in which case you cannot donate organs, or by and large, you cannot donate organs in such a situation. I believe and hope that in the next 10 years, the technology is going to develop where donation after cardiac death is going to be possible. We're working with, as I mentioned, a transplant team at NYU about developing such a protocol, but we're not there yet. And so that's sort of where we're at on that issue. Any other questions? Okay. Ali, unless you feel you want to stick around, but I'll stay on here. People can send me questions. What I am going to do is also include my email here that people can follow up. I know sometimes people have private questions and they have specific issues. And certainly you can reach out to me at brody@amatai.org or get through our website. And we're happy to help and assist people with all sorts of issues. And I really want to encourage people, and I really kol hakavod to Bikur Chol in the Greater Washington for this initiative and many other initiatives, because it helps so much in so many different ways. And when people talk about these things in an earlier point. So I think there's one more question here that someone's asking me to answer. Ali, did you have a question? Someone's asking me that if I didn't miss someone.
One just came up. Organ donation for DMV is for cornea or generally?
So when you sign up to be an organ donor with the DMV, by the way, in general, I recommend people to sign up at Donate Life America or Donate Life Maryland, it can be, or Donate Life Virginia, because that's where you can very clearly see what you're signing up for. You can sign up at those places and say, I only want, right, a cornea to be donated, or I only want heart valves or something like that, which is something that can be donated after cardiac death. In fact, you can even write, I only want a kidney, right? Kidneys are sustainable even after cardiac death. There's not really a great protocol yet for organ retrieval then, but you could say, I only want those things to be donated after death is declared. Okay? You can specify those things, but just make sure you feel comfortable when you sign up on those websites or the DMV that you know exactly what you're signing up for. Sometimes at DMVs, they also give an option to donate your body to science, which raises all sorts of other halachic issues. The issue we've been talking about is only organ donation for transplantation. Right? That is the purpose that we're speaking of right now. There's a question that came up here. What about decisions concerning cessation of life support while the heart is still beating? Is this halachically permissible? So it depends. A lot of this depends on what you're stopping and how it's being stopped and how this will impact the patient. It's really a much broader conversation. So I prefer not to get into that now. And that's why I think it's important in advanced healthcare directives to make sure that if you sign something with your estate attorney, that you don't have something in there which specifies you want or don't want something when it might not be halachically allowed or might be interpreted in a way in which goes against halacha. Someone wrote in here, could we get into a follow-up seminar with regard to issues of life support interventions and all that stuff? Yes, great idea. Great idea. All in favor of that.
Another question here. What if you want your organ to be donated and it is not immediately given to the recipient for transplant? Can we still do that?
I couldn't hear the question again. What was it?
What if you want your organ to be donated and it is not immediately given to the recipient for transplant? Can we still do that donation?
So organ donation, there's such a long line. There's well over 100,000 people in the United States alone waiting for organs. And so you don't bank organs. You can't, it's not like a skin. Skin can be banked, cornea can be banked for a little bit. Organ donation, retrieval, and transplantation has to be done in a relatively short time. So if it is possible to do organ donation, there's not going to be a wait that's going to cause some form of problem. That's just not the reality. It's probably because physically we don't have the ability to maintain the vitality of those organs for that long. It's gotten longer than it used to be, but it's certainly not something that can be banked. And there's such a desperate line of people waiting. I mean, I think in the United States, 17 to 20 people die every single day waiting for an organ. So there's no lack of need for that. That'll be listed. I see there's another question here. What to do at the time of death? It's a little bit of a different type of conversation. We try to include some stuff here. Maybe Biko Cholam also has material on there. But that's something that which should be important. We could do in another type of session about, particularly when people die in home or hospitals, wherever it might be. This type of question comes up. Absolutely. Ali, do you have any more questions as well coming your way?
Maybe. Okay. Yeah, can you just talk a little bit more if it's possible? Someone's asking again, there was an earlier question about Maryland and the doctor being able to make end-of-life decisions. Because it's a very, Maryland heavy group, could you just say?
Sure, yeah, of course. So this is as follows. The question was making distinction between New York and New Jersey versus Maryland. New York and New Jersey have a very unique law, which was passed because of various types of political pressure on bodies, which said that the criteria for death, which in every state in the United States has accepted brainstem death, and the irreversible cessation of respiration as the time of death. And therefore, if the tests are done on a person and they find the person to be brain dead, the hospital will declare the person to be dead. And therefore, since they're dead, they're going to remove a ventilator or vasopressors or IV, whatever else it might be, because there's no point in keeping in these interventions to a dead corpse. New Jersey and New York, particularly New Jersey, have a special law which says that a person can object to that criteria for death, and therefore can say, I don't want these things to be removed because I don't consider the person to be dead. Now, in a place like Maryland, if you really don't want that declaration to happen and you're afraid that brain death has occurred, you can ask the hospital and say to the hospital, we don't want the tests that are done to determine brain death to be done. And the hospital may decide to respect that wish. It may not, depends on the hospital. Legally, they're allowed to do the test. This is not New York and New Jersey. Legally allowed to do what's known as the apnea test to check for your breathing or other types of clinical exams. And they could declare you dead. In this respect, if you really don't want them to do that test, you should tell them that beforehand. So that way your religious opinion is respected. When it comes to in the absence of death, though, that only has to do with the declaration of death. There are many times when someone is clearly alive, but there is deemed as no hope of any form of recovery, even to some form of basic baseline. And the question then in the general world, Maryland and other places, is that they will allow for the withdrawal the removal of certain life-sustaining interventions, like a ventilator, like an IV, like various forms of artificial nutrition and hydration, which will allow for natural death, sometimes rather quickly even, right? Because they've said it's medically inappropriate or even futile to keep on with these interventions. That raises, however, many halachic issues, depending on the situation, if the removal of a certain continuous life-sustaining therapy or intervention, such as a ventilator, will lead to the quick passing of the patient. And in that case, it is important for a person to say to the healthcare provider, to the hospital, I do not want, for religious or other reasons, this life-sustaining intervention to be removed, because whether I agree with you or not, I don't want, it goes against my religious conscience to have that done. Okay, that is important to clarify. Right now, sometimes people will call me up and say, listen, the doctors are telling us to quote unquote pull the plug, do what's known as palliative extubation, right? To remove the ventilator. But they're also telling us that our loved one will die right away. And we know that's against halacha. We'd like to find a way to allow for natural death, but not to violate halacha. And when that happens, I will sit down with the family and the healthcare provider and look at what types of interventions they're getting, what situation they're in, and see if there are things that might be withheld which will allow for natural death without causing immediate death and violate halacha. And that has to be done on a case-by-case basis. So if you go on our website, you'll see some of the explanations of that, but that really has to be done on a case-by-case basis. But in that respect, Maryland isn't different from any other state, where the law allows for people to say, I want certain interventions to be maintained for religious or other reasons. It's only when it comes to the question of the time of death where New York and New Jersey are different than Maryland and other states. I hope that clarifies it.
All right, we're really at time. So I just want to thank everybody for coming on to this, and especially to Dr. Brody and to Rachel for helping us run this. I personally found it very informative, and I'm, hoping that the audience will come back to our other sessions that we hold throughout this year.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you so much to Bikur Cholim and to Audrey and to Ali and to the whole Nachem and the whole team for this wonderful opportunity. I look forward to further collaboration.
Thank you.